Okay, so this one is slightly different than I planned because the original idea was to do Logan's Run in Westworld, but apparently I haven't seen Logan's Run in a really long time, and apparently it's a really hard movie to get a hold of, at least around here it is. So instead of going through the whole I'll just order it online thing, it occurred to me that I could always do a kind of old school versus new school robots, or old school versus new school robots. If you want to call 13 years ago new school, but I mean, in comparison to the 1973 movie version of Westworld, iRobot looks new. So I figured this is fine. Um, so if we want to start with iRobot, you'll notice that I imagine a lot of people. There's, I mean, it's just one of those movies that just kind of screams Hollywood when you look at the source material. Um, and the source material, I do have that around here somewhere, and I also have this. It's yeah, obviously in the credits it says suggested by the Isaac Asimov book, not necessarily based on or anything like that. It's just they took the laws and then they had their own thing going on, and just used the title, basically. And they made Will Smith the poster child. I do kind of like the way the you'll notice the DVD cover, but it also comes in this sleeve, and it's like you can. It's almost like it's your choice whether or not you make Will Smith the poster child, because it's this whole thing is just a picture of Will Smith that you can remove from the cover, and just have the robots, or if you want to say, I believe this is Sonny in the front here, and notice he lines up with Will Smith and isn't on the side of him, so it's like, are they kind of one and the same, or at least partially? I don't know. The movies are what the fuck you want them to be, because of what we learn about him later. But another thing is that there is also this book as well, which I've had forever. I don't know how well you can see that, but the idea was that they basically took, Harlan Ellison actually basically took Asimov's book and made it in script form, including illustrations. And this was basically, it's actually word for word here. Asimov said, "This is the first really adult, complex, worthwhile science fiction movie ever made, should this have ever been an actual movie." But obviously it ended up not being. So, yeah, so this is basically what they always imagined that this kind of movie would be like. There's one that kind of gives you almost like an Ex Machina vibe, if you want to go back to, like, or forward to, like, 2015. And it's one of those cases also where it's like, this was put out in like 1994, I think, which is exactly 10 years before this came out. And it's the first thing it says here is, for more than 25 years, numerous attempts were made to adapt Isaac Asimov's classic story cycle, iRobot, to the motion picture medium. All efforts failed. Despite the fact that this is 10 years before the movie actually came out, some people might still say that. And it's understandable. But now that we have addressed the source material a little bit, let's talk about what Hollywood gave us as a result of it. And it is, I mean, I think they did something interesting enough here, where they took the concept of the laws and then used that to kind of make, like, kind of like their own detective kind of murder mystery thing here. Even if it is still a giant special effects ridden blockbuster. But we are going to 2035, and which obviously is much closer now than it was in 2004. And one thing I just want to get out of the way real quick. One thing that's brought up a lot, and one thing that a lot of people love to bitch about when this movie comes up, is the obvious product placement. But given the fact that it's in 2035, and our protagonist is a guy that is pretty much entirely anti-robot, and given how crucial they are, seemingly anti-future, So it makes sense to his character, if we're being honest, that he seems to want to stick with everything in the past. He's got the old-fashioned, like, JVC stereo that Bridget Moynahan doesn't know how to work because it's not voice-activated. And obviously his Converse shoes that he mentions more than once. But I don't know. It's never bothered me, and I don't think it's all that out of place because just the whole everything is retro to him. So it makes sense, honestly, because yeah, with this whole it shows how his character is not willing to move forward and makes him stand out amongst everybody else, just as it will when our little murder mystery starts coming into play and he starts thinking that maybe it's everything that seems normal in the future is not what it seems. So, and obviously the whole putting Will Smith in it as well, somebody so recognizable that's clearly going to take us, just his mere presence is going to take us even farther away from the source material, because it's going to become not just a big action blockbuster movie or sci-fi special effects, all that, it's also going to be a Will Smith movie. So, but that's, not a bad thing. At least in 2004 it wasn't. So, and it makes sense, because you might say, well, he seems awfully out of place in 2035 because he's present day Will Smith, present day back then. But that's the thing, is Will Smith is actually very good at playing the one guy that's out of place. For God's sake, that's the whole concept of Fresh Prince, that he's out of place in his environment. So all that is fine in the context of the movie itself, if we're not looking beyond that. So, and obviously it goes on, and there's stuff that's maybe not so that far in the future, like the moment when he decides he's going to drive manually during this pursuit or whatever, and Bridget Moynahan is shocked and says, "You're going to drive by hand?" And it's and it's like, maybe we're not too far off from that, from what we hear, but yeah, it does eventually go into the whole thing to where he is a cop, he is in Chicago, regardless of the fact that it's 2035 and robots are running rampant. There's still plenty of cop cliches. There's the whole moment when, after he has tried to stop the robot that was just delivering the purse to its owner that forgot it, he is being ridiculed, and it's that ancient scene of the cop that messed up, and he's being ridiculed by his buddies at the station while the superior berates him. But the thing is for a while, it's actually kind of interesting to see these old-fashioned cop cliches, especially coming from a character that is just kind of hell-bent on sticking to old-fashioned, have these things happen to him in the context of this futuristic world still, to where it's kind of like the old school stays with him, not just in the products he buys. So there's that. And that also kind of comes into play when he's having a conversation with his superior, who is Shy McBride, because he's always the superior, or the wise one anyway. And they're having this talk, and he's a dude. He's a dude that so far in the future he can't tell the difference between the Wolfman and Frankenstein. Because I don't know how that happens, but that's the way he is. And they're having this conversation, and we start kind of putting in those cliches again, those cop cliches. But it's the moment where there's an awareness to it, especially with Shy McBride's character, because obviously we're watching it and we think that something is up with James Cromwell's death, and Will Smith believes that a robot has done this, so when he's trying to get this out, Shy McBride's the one that says, so you're the guy, you're like the only guy in this world that is anti-robot, that thinks the robots are up to no good and all this stuff. What are the odds that you're the one that finds out there actually is something wrong? Like, what kind of, like, how does that? And then, obviously, yes, as an audience, we're probably thinking the same thing if we're nitpicking. And then that awareness continues in this same scene, on that same path, when he does the thing, the old cliche, where they're talking and talking, and then he just says one thing, McBride says one thing, and it tips Will Smith off, and he suddenly has a giant clue on his hands because of one thing somebody said. But once again, I feel like there's an awareness there with the way he says that, and then Smith turns to him and says, "What did you say?" Like he's had an epiphany. And McBride's response to this is just, "Oh, now what?" And so it's like, I do feel like that's there. Like, the movie knows what it's doing, and it's intentionally putting these cliches in an entirely different world than we've seen them in before. So, that I feel like that's easily forgiven, at least to me anyway. And then they finally cap that off with the whole contrast there where it's McBride realizes that the old school way works. Basically the cliches work. Because it gets him to the next point in this case. And I feel like that's kind of perfectly capped off with the fact that on his way out, he compliments his shoes. It's almost as if to say, yeah, I guess the old school works. So that's the way I take that anyway. You could just see it as, oh my god, will they stop mentioning the damn shoes? But but that's the way I saw it. It was him actually saying, acknowledging that maybe the old school actually will get them somewhere, and to compliment him on that just furthers that. It's also a movie that's fairly well done. Obviously, Alex Proyas is our director, who I think is amazing. He's brought us the likes of The Crow and Dark City and Knowing. I mean, obviously, I think his last movie was Gods of Egypt. So it's, but the thing here though is he certainly does have a style to him. It does feel a lot more like a studio's movie than it does his, by far. But there are still some things that are nicely done here. I particularly like the reveal with Cromwell when he's talking to this holographic message. But it does look kind of stilted when we're cutting just back and forth, and it's just like front shots, and so we kind of get there's probably going to be some kind of reveal here. But then yeah, it does go around. We realize Cromwell is like this holographic image, and then as he goes down and back into the message goes down, the shot goes right into his body laying there, and we realize that he's talking to somebody who is actually dead now and whose murder he's going to be investigating, murder or suicide. So I thought that was nicely done. And then there's some very memorable scenes, like for instance, the one where all the robots are lined up and Spooner has to figure out which one Sonny is because he's hiding. And it's like, yeah, it feels like a very classic scene inside this very futuristic Hollywood movie. And while we're on this, we'll also go into the fact that the way Will Smith handles this character, if we want to, kind of bring the movie down a peg because we want to say, oh, they just wanted to make a Will Smith movie, they're not interested in the iRobot concept at all. I do really like what he's doing here for the most part, even if the Will Smithisms are in there, like when the whole thing opens up and the robots attack him and he does the patented hell no thing that he does. One of his funny lines I do love, it's like one of my favorite moments in the movie, is towards the end when they're going to confront Vicky, but there's the giant stairwell, and Sonny tells them how many steps there are, and he just looks to him and says, keep that shit to yourself. Like, his exact line. Yeah, so the thing about it is, though, when he's being serious, and he's got to do his delivery and just his mannerisms when he talks about this stuff, it's like he's doing a legitimate portrayal of prejudice when he talks about the robots. It's like anybody could talk this way about anybody else and you could see that there'd be like some kind of prejudice factor involved in it. And there's even the moment when the scene where he's looking for Sonny amidst the crowd, and he's looking at them with his gun trained on them, and he seems legitimately disgusted when he asks the question, why do you give them faces? Like, he seems like legitimately put off by that, in a way that's like deeply unsettling to him. So I really like the way that was handled, but then, like I said, there's the whole angle of, we learn that he's more or less like part cyborg as well, so I think part cyborg is redundant, but you get what I mean. So, and so there's a whole identity thing you could throw into that if you want to, but it's the movie is only kind of surface level when we get to that point. Um, and there's also the way Sonny himself is handled, with Alan Tudyk doing the motion capture, which was made famous by Andy Serkis just prior to this. This was just after Return of the King. And it's some really beautiful work. If you watch some of the special features and you see the way he like perfected the movements, and it's like everything you see Sonny do in this movie, it's not way too over the top. Is all Alan Tudyk. He just moves exactly like that, and it's really weird to watch him after you've seen the movie, because you think he only did so much, but he did a lot more than you may even think. Up to and including the facial expressions just really kind of come through, um, and are definitely brought through in a way that CGI by itself could not have done. They really needed an actor in there, and an actor that can express the way that he does so well. It's so interesting to see an actor who's so incredibly good and mostly famous for his voice, can also be just as diverse with his facial expressions and the way he does that. Um, and so there's the moments when we get to see the different sides of this, where there's the time where he shows anger for the first time and slams his fist down on the table and puts fucking dents in it. But then there's the moment when he kind of has like the HAL 9000 vibe, when he's got that voice that's too friendly. Like his voice is so friendly, it makes him more suspicious, and it makes you think, well, I mean, we know, given the type of movie that it is, that Spooner is gonna be right, that there's something wrong with them. But there's just something a little unsettling about Sonny's voice here, to where it's like, it's too friendly, which means he's definitely hiding something. Uh, and, um, and that's all of this, a lot of this is Alan Tudyk just giving it everything that he can, and it's fantastic. But that's not to take away from the visual effects artist, who I think got Oscar nominations for this. Don't hold me to that, but I'm pretty sure this got in visual effects. Um, and so, yeah, going on that, how we feel about Sonny when we watch him, obviously that propels the movie into this area of, like, paranoia. Um, and it's, like, it starts off small, like the moment when, his grandmother ends up hiring a robot to do her stuff for her because she hit the lottery. And there's this robot that's cooking for her, and the way he looks back at Spooner, it's like, is he like really sinister, or is this Spooner's building paranoia? Because there's even the moment when he's trapped in the tunnel and the things are coming up on him, and it's like, is this suddenly like a futuristic version of the China Syndrome now? And then this whole action scene happens, and then everything gets cleared out when the cops show up, and it's like, now they're just trying to gaslight him. And it's like, it really kind of turns into this kind of paranoia thing. Like, the movie goes in that direction, like, full on. But even so, yeah, and I do think it kind of does that stuff well, especially given the kind of movie they clearly wanted to make here, and what was much more their focus was this big sci-fi action movie. But I do think once it starts going, this is the movie for a good while, like at least for the first hour, but then it does eventually kind of lose its way. Like there is, eventually there's another moment again when he has the epiphany cliche. But at that point in the movie, there's no awareness attached to it. Like, they want to play it straight now, after it seemed like they acknowledged that they were using old stuff to get the story going. And so that kind of starts to lose you. Then there's the moment when he's in Cromwell's house and he gets the cat that he ultimately takes. And they do the cat jump scene thing for some reason. I don't know. And then there's like the whole breadcrumbs thing with Hansel and Gretel, and he there's like this really stilted dialogue where he's trying to explain Hansel and Gretel to Bridget Moynihan, and it's like it just gets really forced, and it's there a lot longer than it needs to be. And speaking of Bridget Moynihan, pretty much her character in general, she's basically there to be the female counterpart, but there's not really a whole lot that she does. and they're there to exchange dialogue, like, you're the smartest dumb person I know, and you're the dumbest dumb person I know. And yeah. Um, and so, yeah, but it does start to lose its way when it, like, wants to go really big. Like, there's some really good action scenes. The scene in the tunnel is a good action scene. And it's one of those cases where it does feel like the character is getting trapped, and he's getting farther and farther down this hole that they're trying to bury him in. But it does get to the point where we have, like, the big open spaces. We got, like, the climax of the Phantom Menace place here, and it gets a little too big for its own good, I think. And really, just one of the big crimes here is that you have you have a director like Alex Proyas bringing this together, and it's like, this is a guy that clearly has a stamp when you look at, like, The Crow and Dark City, but it's just not. That stamp is really not here. Like I said, every now and then there's something where you can tell it's, like, nicely done visually, but it's just it doesn't feel like him. Like, even in Knowing, you kind of felt like the old Proyas with the really dark tones and stuff was coming through, regardless of how you feel about that movie. And, yeah, obviously going on, there is stuff here, like when they figure out what Vicky's doing and how everything's been kind of corrupted here, and with the evolution and all that, to where it just went out of the... I mean, not only is Bruce Greenwood brought about, like, some kind of big villain, but we basically realized that the fact that they were programmed to evolve, and they just naturally got out of the hands of humans, and did their own thing. It just feels very much like we've seen this territory explored before with the likes of HAL 9000, or when The Day the Earth Stood Still, even, is in here, when they talk about the whole, what humans have made the world and all that shit. And it's, yeah, so it's been explored before and all this, so it really doesn't have anything new to say except, hey, this is what happens if you take this old concept from Asimov's book and you make a Will Smith action movie out of it with a lot of special effects. But what they made is fine, especially when you look at it that way. When it looks like it could just be some big corporate thing, it's actually pretty good, considering what it could have been when you think about other movies that exist just as, like, corporate products and stuff like that. Just to sell shit or whatever. So I do think there was some care put into it. And they did, whether it's stuff we've explored before, that it tried to explore it, is good enough when you think about just the way the movie was brought about in general. So... yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. I've seen it multiple times. I'll probably see it more times as well. So it's very entertaining. Like I said, the action scenes are quite good for the most part until we get to the end and they start to feel kind of like the same old shit. But yeah, for taking a story like that and putting Will Smithisms in it, you did okay. So let's go on real quickly to Westworld. It was made in 1973, so we're going way ahead into the really far futuristic world of 1983. And this movie is brought to us by Michael Crichton. I believe he went straight to the script stage with this. There was no novel in between. He's our writer and director. And obviously Crichton is the guy where, obviously he wrote, like, Jurassic Park, and a lot of other novels, to the point that he's basically come to be known as, he's been labeled before the guy that popularized science, basically. Especially amidst book readers, or fiction book readers and all that. And he's brought us to this world, quite literally, where really rich people, really rich adults, pay $1,000 a day to go to these worlds where you're basically immersed into a fictional setting where everybody is a robot, but you get like a 100% real experience out of it because they're just that well programmed into the future of 1983. And on top of Westworld, we also have Roman World and Medieval World. And so we've really set up this big concept here that we will explore in different areas. Maybe not as much as you would hope. The runtime is really short. This movie is an hour and 28 minutes. And there's a lot of stuff to explore in this concept. And we get the whole setup kind of as it goes, with Richard Benjamin kind of figuring this out. And it helps that he's got James Brolin with him, and James Brolin has done this before, so we get Brolin's kind of works as a bit of an exposition machine, but enough to where it makes sense that he'd be explaining this to a friend, to where it actually does feel very touristy and like a theme park, to where it's like you have the guy that's been here before that's hyping it up to somebody else. And that's more or less what the exposition feels like, so it doesn't feel heavy. And the concept is just so interesting you don't mind exposition, because you want to know more about what exactly all the rules are and how it works. And the whole idea, the first explanation of the fact that this is something that's not even explained to us. We kind of get the vibe going in, and then we start to realize it as it goes on. The fact that the tourists can't even tell who's real. You can't tell who's a robot and who's another tourist. But they do have safety ways of working this out that keep people from like killing each other. So, and obviously one of our main attractions here is you're continuously accosted by a gunslinger robot that is Yul Brynner. Obviously a reference to his character in Magnificent Seven. I think I read somewhere they're even wearing the same clothes. And the interesting thing about Brenner's character here is he just starts off as an attraction. He just walks in, he picks a fight with you, and you shoot him. And that's the whole concept. But once the malfunction happens, he becomes a horror movie character. And I mean that almost all the way, because if you read up on it and you listen to them talk about it, Yul Brynner's character in this movie was the basis for at least a couple of horror movie characters. There was, he's very much, you can definitely tell this by the end, how he's the basis for Michael Myers, because he's the kind of character that you keep taking him down and he just keeps getting back up. Even if you burn him, he gets back up. That scene always kind of gave me, I wonder if Child's Play borrowed from that as well. There's even the moment when he shoots him and he like goes out the window. It feels like Carpenter really definitely borrowed this when the last scene of Halloween, when Donald Pleasence shoots him and he goes over the balcony. And it's like, when you go back and watch Westworld and you know that, it becomes very clear that Yul Brynner's character in this is basically how we ended up with the unkillable slasher movie character that would go on for years to come and still exists. And he was also, to my understanding, the basis for the Terminator. That clearly makes sense. Like, we don't even really need to go into that. And there's also, and I do like the way he's played, where Brenner has that delivery, and he has that voice that just perfectly embodies this guy doesn't feel human. There's something unnatural about him. And there's even that moment I really like, I don't even know if it was on purpose or if that's even the purpose of the shot, but after he's shot Brolin and he goes to twirl the gun and put it away, it's like it falls off his finger and he kind of fumbles with it and he misses the holster. It only lasts for a second, like it was an in-production mistake. But I like to think that's just kind of enhancing the whole malfunction idea. Plus, there's the whole thing that their hands are still kind of fucked up. Their hands are imperfected. So I feel like that kind of really showcased the whole imperfection angle, even if maybe it wasn't on purpose. I don't know. It looked like, as far as a movie being made, it looked way too naturally like an imperfection to where you have to ask, was that a problem with the actual movie, or is it actually doing the robots are fucked up thing? They're malfunctioning. And another thing that it does here is that we get to see the other worlds. Where, like, it kind of brings about like the concept of the Nightmare Before Christmas, when Jack goes into the Christmas world, and it's kind of like you spend the whole movie wondering what it's like behind the other doors. But here we do actually get to see the other worlds. And there's really not a whole lot to that, except we're just building up to when the carnage is going to happen. And it's like, it does kind of mess up the vibe whenever we go to another world. But the fact that it sets up that it's happening in all the worlds this carnage that's coming. It's a decent enough setup, and it does kind of satisfy curiosity, and it makes it feel like it's exploring the concept as much as it can. Um, so there is that, and it's also one of those cases to where it's like it makes sense that we're in like the Roman world and the medieval world, because obviously there's the gun before we even know that there's going to be a malfunction. There's the whole thing where Brolin explains there's a sensor that can pick up body heat, and that's how they know whether to actually fire real bullets or not. Whether because if it's a real person, they won't, and they have that precaution. But in the medieval and the Roman worlds, it's swords, and it's like you can stop a bullet from firing, but a sword is a sword. And that's always going to be a weapon, and you can't stop that. So it does feel like it kind of sets that up a little bit when we come back to the other worlds. And so, yeah, that's the way we play this out. And I do think it's interesting to think about that there is another entirely different way this movie could have played out. They could have done the whole kind of make it just as much an illusion to the audience and not show the behind-the-scenes guys. The behind-the-scenes guys also kind of give you a vibe of, I wonder if Whedon and Drew Goddard kind of took inspiration from this for Cabin in the Woods as well, just in a much more sinister way, to where it's on purpose. But here, we do get to see the whole kind of the cleanup crew thing and the whole behind-the-scenes thing, and it's basically like you're getting two movies for the price of one. You're getting a Western and a sci-fi movie. Which I imagine was the whole kind of thing to begin with, and this whole... I heard Crichton was inspired when he went on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and it looked real to him, so it was like, what if you couldn't tell the difference, and what if something went horribly wrong? And yeah, so yeah, it's probably... I mean, you could probably... There's probably something about society in there, but for the most part, like the whole kind of touristy thing, and, I don't know, maybe a consumerism thing, if you want to dig that deep, but... the thing here, though, is, yeah, this could have been just one thing where it just plays up, like, they just stick to the Western world, we don't see the other worlds, we don't see the behind-the-scenes, and the whole movie plays up like an ambiguous Western, and we just kind of get lost in that. But I do like that we get all the different aspects of it. We get to see the medieval portion that kind of, it's almost like it feels like we're watching so many different movies all at once while getting the same story, that all comes to a head at the same time when the malfunction happens. And to get all that in an hour and 28 minutes feels like we're getting, like, a lot for the price. And this also sets up the fact that once the malfunction happens, it's kind of like we're getting two races against the clock. We're getting Richard Benjamin basically trying to get away from Yul Brynner while also they're racing to try to figure this out behind the scenes before anything else bad happens. But obviously it gets way too far out of hand to control after a while, and the movie just goes completely off that. But even before that happens, it is, like, talking about the different movies and all that and the genres, there's stuff like the whole idea that Crichton writes novels, and usually he'll write a novel, then it's adapted to the screen, like Jurassic Park, for instance. But it's like actually worthy of note that he actually just went straight to the script stage with this, because if you look at like the jailbreak scene among many other scenes, it's almost like it speaks to the excitement of the movie experience itself. When they do the whole jailbreak thing, because they know it's all set up, it's all pre-planned, like a script, and they can have that excitement because there's a danger, but they know it's not real danger because they're just robots and they're programmed to do non-lethal things. And so it's like when you watch the excitement in a movie, you can get that excitement faster because there's the safety, that the fact that it's on a screen and nothing can actually hurt you. And so I do think it's almost like the whole idea was to make it a movie only because the whole thing itself, not just the whole touristy thing, but just the movie experience in general, it seems to kind of capture with the whole idea of this theme park. And then obviously the malfunction happens, and we get this thing when Yul Brynner is chasing him once again, and it starts to feel like a slasher movie. You've got dead bodies everywhere, you've got the unkillable thing coming after you, and you don't know when it's going to pop up, you don't know where it is waiting for you. You've just watched a close friend die, and like everything is out of control now. And the interesting thing that Crichton was able to accomplish here, and I think this might, to another person this might be a criticism, but to me it just really brings forth how well he captured this concept and the directions it was going and was always meant to go. Was, we've got a Western, we've got a sci-fi movie, we've got a medieval movie, we've got the Roman times movie, we've got all this stuff going on and all these different things. But the last 15 or so minutes of this movie feel like a horror movie. Like, we just abandon all those genres. It still looks like a sci-fi movie in one instance. It still looks like a Western in another sense. And it could be, like, maybe this is a showdown in a Western. But no, once he's getting chased by Brenner, after he's figured out what's going on, it's a horror movie. Like, it really is. Like, like by definition. And which makes this climax really interesting and really makes it feel like we've gone through so many different things and captured so many things and ideas in this very short runtime. And I think that's really the impressive thing he does here. So, yeah, and there's also the sequel, Future World, which is obviously the excitement isn't as much there, but it's worth looking for. And obviously this would go on. I keep mentioning Jurassic Park is another one of his works, where this kind of does take that same concept of the park going awry thing. So you could tell this is like an early basis to what was to come as well. And on the topic of that, obviously, yes, this is a very popular, very beloved TV series right now on HBO. I think it is, with Anthony Hopkins, James Marsden, Tandy Newton, the wonderful and amazing Evan Rachel Wood. And yeah, this is definitely a concept that really lent itself to the TV series setup. So it was very interesting to see them go in that direction. I think it's Jonathan Nolan that's plays a big part in that. So yes, so yeah, with the way he was able to explore all these genres and make a really fun and exciting movie that basically gives you that whole experience and has the characters giving you the same experience, it's all good. So that's what we have here. So obviously Westworld is the classic here. Westworld's the one that really kind of set this whole thing off in regards. It set a lot of things off, is what I'm saying. And the way it really used the do we trust AI or not kind of paranoia in a very effective way. So yeah, but I still think iRobot is more or less successful in what it does, given once again what it could have been. And but yeah, they certainly gave it a go, and I think it turned out decently. But I mean, yeah, it's you just get so much more for the price of admission with Westworld. So there's that. I think this is where I'm going to end this. So next week we're going to do the Apocalypse Now Deer Hunter versus, and then yeah, there's the Justice League review, which hopefully will be tomorrow when you see this, the next day, and then yeah, we'll go from there. I'm giving you also another one of those videos that's got like 15 like small releases on them that I've been watching over time, so there's that as well. So yeah, so until all that stuff, that's it.